Hey, good morning, Pete, North Las Vegas. I thought we'd do one final build video on this LR308 that I just recently put together. And I'm not going to go over like every last little detail. I did a bunch of videos on this rifle before, way more than I planned on doing. But I thought we'd hit some of the key things that I think might be important if you're going to put one of these together yourself. This is a DPMS pattern, and it's a DPMS low pattern. And as we get a little bit more into the video, we'll talk about the difference between a low and a high pattern upper receiver. So anyway, we'll start at the front of the rifle and work our way back. Like I said, I'll try to focus in on things that didn't quite go right, things that were obstacles, things that you got to watch out for. Okay, so I just went with a standard bird cage on this A2 version. I went with a jam nut on this one just for ease of timing and a little bit more flexibility as far as how much torque I provide on the jam nut, and the fact that the jam nut can be reused repeatedly, where crush washers and even some of the spacers and peel washers, depending on how thick or thin they are, you may not be able to reuse them. So that was kind of the idea on this. And the reason I went with the jam nut. Now, if you're running some other type of muzzle device that doesn't need to be timed, you don't need a jam nut. If you're running a can, you may not even be able to use a jam nut. But anyway, that's why I chose the jam nut for this build. Just ease of installation and reuse. This is a Wilson Combat Tactical Hunter barrel. It's fully fluted. It's an 18-inch barrel. It's got kind of an oddball twist rate, 11.25 to 1. The Tactical Hunter uses a .750 gas block journal, where Wilson Combat's Super Sniper barrels, I think they're the next size up. And the Super Sniper barrel is also about 10 ounces more than this barrel. But the primary reason I put this barrel on was, at the time, the rifle speed adjustable gas block that I wanted to use. The only thing available at the time was the .750 journal size. So I'm really too overly concerned about the Super Sniper rifle being 10 ounces heavier. Maybe get an idea of the contour as we get into the receiver. Okay, so the rifle speed adjustable gas block is toolless if you're not familiar with them. All you do is turn this ring here to increase or decrease the amount of gas. The two plungers that he sends with the kit are 917 and 937. That's in inches, so that's .917 inches and .937 inches. So that's what will come with your rifle speed gas block. What ended up working for my rifle was the 897, which I had to buy separately. And this allowed me to run low-powered NATO and the hotter commercial 308 and still have a good amount of adjustment. Say I wanted to run a can. And so I believe I have a full range of adjustment now using this plunger. Now, like I said, this is on my barrel, my rifle. Your results may be different. You may have to use a different size plunger. Overall fit and finish, it's a really good design. Very happy with it. Once I got it dialed in and figured out the correct plunger. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this, but the gas block uses a straight gas tube. There's no bend in this gas tube. It just runs straight into the receiver. Okay, so at the beginning of the video, we were talking about low pattern versus high pattern on the upper receiver. And New Frontier Armory goes with the low pattern DPMS. And if you don't know what you have, there's a pretty quick way to determine whether you have a low pattern or a high pattern. Now, in the high pattern, the rail is a little bit thicker and sticks up a little bit higher. And the reason that it's important that you know which pattern you have is handguard selection. Some companies only make a low pattern. Some companies only make a high pattern. Aero Precision only makes a high pattern. Midwest Industries makes a low and a high pattern. So the quickest way to tell which upper receiver you have is to measure the thickness of the tang back here. So we'll stick some calipers on there. Low pattern is supposed to be about 0.150 inches. And then on the high pattern, this tang thickness will be 0.210. So we'll put my calipers on here and I'll show you real quick. This one comes in a little bit thicker than 0.150, but I think that's just because of the anodize. Okay, so this receiver comes in about 0.156, so it's a little bit thicker than nominal. But what I did notice was this other upper receiver came in at about the same, but it matches perfectly with the handguard. So even though it's a slightly oversized, it worked out perfect. Now, if this was a high pattern upper receiver, this would be measuring, okay, so here's a perfect 0.150. And if this was a high pattern, you would be up at 2.210. So you'd be right about there. So that's how much more you would be on your rail. So we'll go back down. Don't know if you're able to see that well on the camera, but so that's the difference between low and high pattern. Okay, so now we're going to get into one of the issues. Okay, so once again, the rifle speed gas block uses a straight gas tube. There's no bend in it. The issue I ran into, this is one of the first issues I ran into during the build. You're going to go to a lot of online sites and retailers that are claiming that an LR308 DPMS pattern uses a gas tube length of 15.125, which is basically AR-15 spec. And I found out that that did not fit this rifle correctly, that my rifle required the correct Armalite spec of 15.4 inches for a rifle length gas system. And I looked around online and I was able to find some gas tubes that were bent at that dimension, but I couldn't find any straight gas tubes at 15.4. So I ended up going to White Oak Armament. They make custom gas tubes. So you tell them what you want, whether it's straight, bent in a figure eight or looking like a pretzel or whatever you want. You just tell them the length and they'll build it for you. So anyway, you can see the difference. The AR-15 spec that was supposed to work according to certain online retailers versus the 15.4. Now what I actually have installed in the rifle right now is a 15.5. And during testing, I had plenty of clearance on the gas key using a 15.5. So, but that's the actual spec, 15.4. And I'll try to simulate this. It won't be exact. I would only be able to show you in the rifle, but here's the AR-15 that I originally had installed. And let's just say that it engaged that much. Let me get my finger on it. Probably not picking that up on the camera. Let's say once it was in a rifle, it engaged that far. And you can see that you can go a lot further than that with a 15.4. And on my rifle, I had room for a 15.5, which is what I installed. So this is a 15.4. If I decide to build another LR308 that uses a straight gas tube, then I got one for a new build or a spare. And let me try to demonstrate where the gas tube should end up in your receiver if it's the correct length. Okay, so for those of you not familiar with ARs, this section here is your cutout for your cam pin on your BCG. And when I first put the rifle together with the incorrect length gas tube, that's kind of where it sat in relation to the cam pin cutout. And the correct length gas tube, like 15.4, and like I was saying earlier, I was able to get away with 15.5, should be sitting more in the middle, like almost in the middle. And I've seen some rifles where it's just slightly past the middle, and you can still get a good fitment with your bolt carrier group gas key without interference. But each receiver, each gas tube, each BCG, everything is going to be unique. So, you know, you got to double check all this stuff and make sure that you're not going to have any interference, or that bolt carrier comes down and slams this gas tube and mangles it up. So even though I've given you some numbers and some specs, your rifle may be just ever so slightly different. Okay, so because I went with a Wilson Combat barrel, I decided I would go with their bolt carrier too. I don't think it's a requirement or anything. You know, DPMS is DPMS, but I thought there may be less chance of an issue if I went with Wilson Combat on both the carrier and the barrel. This is one of the heaviest bolt carrier groups on the market. It comes in at 18.6 ounces. So it's a beast. The reason I mention the weight is because if you put one of these together, it might be a good idea to know what your bolt carrier weighs, and that may help you choose the correct buffer weight back here. Buffer weights vary quite a bit, but we'll get to that in just a minute. But that's the reason I mentioned the weight. It uses a solid pin instead of the cotter key type. Fit and finish, very good. Just usual Wilson Combat quality. Head spacing. Wilson Combat claims that the barrel is set up for .308 Winchester and 7.62. And I crunched a bunch of numbers between the Climber and Forster head spacing numbers, and what I came up with was a range, and right in the middle of that range was 1.633. So head spacing on this this barrel and chamber came in at 1.6335 is what I measured using a range of precision head spacing gauges. So Wilson Combat got the head spacing, I mean, right in the middle of the range that I was looking for. So in my opinion, that's perfect to shoot both NATO and .308 Winchester. Okay, so I also decided to go with a Wilson Combat trigger, the TTR tactical trigger. This is the 3.5, 4-pound version single stage. And these can be installed without having to take your selector out or taking the lower section apart. On the back of the area of the trigger that slides underneath the selector, it's spring-loaded. And you can get enough compression to where you can slide it underneath. You don't have to take all this apart like a lot of other triggers, even drop-ins. Very good trigger. Okay, so the next issue I had on this build was the bolt catch release. And for those of you new to the AR platform, that's this here. And this little lever button on the outside goes all the way through the inside. And the problem I was having was this little button right here mates up with the very back end of the follower on the last round. And I'll put this in the rifle and I'll show you how this works. But what happens is on the last round, that green follower I just showed you comes up and catches the bolt once the magazine is empty, and that holds the bolt open. And so I was having some issues. I don't know if I just mentioned it, but it took me 3 tries to find the correct bolt catch release for this rifle. So I'll show you exactly what's going on when we put the magazine in here. Okay, so when you have rounds in the magazine, this follower is down because of the ammunition. And when this is down, that allows this bolt catch to sit like this, and the rifle functions normally. So once you hit empty, that follower pushes up on that little button right there. And like I was saying earlier, that's what keeps your bolt open after you've expended your last round. Now the issues I had was this little tab was either too short or too far off to the left here to make good contact with the follower. And one of the bolt catches that did not work on this rifle was Wilson Combat. And that's too bad because a lot of these are made out of cast steel, and sometimes they shatter and fall apart. And Wilson Combat's was made out of S7 tool steel. So I was kind of bummed out that the Wilson Combat didn't work. And there was another one that I got with the New Frontier Armory. It had almost the same issue, not quite as bad as the Wilson Combat, but that little nub right there that catches on the very back of the follower, I mean, just barely making contact. And I ordered this directly from KAK. And the one that came in a New Frontier Armory kit was also marked KAK, but I'm pretty sure it was AR-15 spec. I don't think it was specific for the 308. So I think that's what the issue was with the first KAK that I got. But this is the second KAK I got, and you can see plenty of contact area. There's no way that this is going to be an issue unless it falls apart. The other bolt catch release that I know of that seems to work in most rifles is Aero Precision. So between this one that I ordered directly from KAK and Aero Precision, those are two that seem to work. Okay, so this was not an issue on my rifle. This is AR-15 spec length, and it fit perfect the way New Frontier machined the lower receiver. I didn't have any issues with the mag release button here as far as thread engagement. You can see that the other side of what I just showed you is flush, and plenty of throw, fully disengages and fully engages on the inside. So no issues with the standard AR-15 dimension. But Aero Precision is one of these receivers to where you'll see on a lot of people, if you look at the close-ups of their mag button, that they did not get full engagement on this button because of how Aero Precision made their receiver. I'm just using them as one example. There's a lot of manufacturers that this dimension kind of changes slightly on the outside. Well, there is a solution to that. If it comes up short, you can get extended, and you got to make sure you get the right one. There's AR-10 spec where the actual catch, the little notch right here, is a different shape and different design. So if you're using this in a DPMS, make sure you get the extended version for DPMS so you get the correct detent. So anyway, I'll line this up with the receiver, and I'll try to line it up the same as in the same spot here. I'm not going to cheat. Okay, so right about there. And you can see roughly how much farther those threads stick out. So depending on what kind of receiver you got, whether you have an extended mag release button or the mil spec dimension, this may be an option for you to get full thread engagement or solve an issue with your magazine release catch. Okay, so the last area of concern I had when I was doing this build was the relationship of this retainer pin right here for your buffer. And when I was closing the upper receiver down, you can see the back of the bolt carrier group here. That's supposed to come down and make pretty good contact with this and push this back so that all the spring pressure and during normal operation of the rifle, that this buffer does not hit that pin once you have these receivers closed up. And what was happening was, with the standard mil-spec dimension, this one in there, the back of the bolt carrier group, I mean, was just barely touching this thing. And you can still see to where this was still touching the retainer pin. It was just kind of taking the pressure off. You could just see it kind of move a little bit and straighten up under the spring pressure of the retainer. But it was still just ever so slightly, seemed like it was up against the buffer. So to solve that issue, I put in an offset. And in case my description didn't work, we'll kind of show you what's going on here. As these two halves close up, you can see where that bolt carrier is supposed to make contact. Now you can see because I have the offset retainer in there, it's making plenty of contact, and it's taking it off the retainer pin. By the time you get it closed, it's completely off the retainer pin. But to solve that issue, one of the companies I found that makes an offset is Galloway Precision. And let me see if I can get this lined up just right. Okay, so there's the black one is your mil-spec dimension where the actual buffer pin is right in the center. And then Galloway Precision, to solve this issue, they put the pin right on the the edge. And they give you a little stepped cutout here for your buffer tube. So that took care of that issue. And so we got one last thing to talk about, and that is the magazines that work on this rifle, and one magazine in particular that does not work. Okay, so one last thing on the buffer. It's an Aero Precision buffer tube, spring, and buffer. The buffer is 3.8 ounces. And that's kind of why I mentioned the Wilson Combat Bolt Carrier Group weight. Between that, the buffer, and the type of spring you choose. And that's another reason I went with the rifle speed adjustable gas. I didn't want to mess around with buffers and springs. I just wanted to be able to fine-tune my rifle with gas. But anyway, if you need to go lighter, and I already mentioned this in one of the other videos, you can get an adjustable. Odin is one manufacturer that makes them, and he gives you different size weights that you can install in your buffer. And you can get down to 3.45 ounces is about the lightest you can go with the buffer weights that Odin supplies in the kit. Now you can go back to them and buy these buffer weights separately, and you could probably get down another couple ounces lower. I don't know why you'd ever want to go below like 3.45 ounces, but you could. Or if you wanted to get up maybe above 5 ounces, you could put, you know, a couple of tungstens in there instead of an aluminum or a stainless. So anyway, that's another option to tune your rifle, which I did not want to get into. Okay, so far these are the magazines that have worked in this rifle flawlessly. No feeding issues whatsoever. Lancer. Magpul. Seymour Products, otherwise known as Duramag. No issues. Magazines that do not work. D&H Tactical. These are not going to work in anybody's LR308 in my opinion. And I'll pop this one apart and I'll show you why. But before we take it apart, let me show you just some little differences. Like here's the Duramag versus D&H Tactical. See the back of the magazine lips? Let me, there we go. You can see how we have this little reinforced area. And you can see that the D&H is more like a bolt action type magazine. But that's not the issue. That's just, I'm showing the differences in the build. So let's get into why the D&H Tactical does not work for my LR308. Okay, so if you're just pushing up and down on this follower with no rounds in it, you won't be able to see or understand what the problem is. I can push down on the front, it won't tilt. I can push down on the back and it won't tilt, the middle. But as soon as I put rounds in here, if I get more than 2 or 3 rounds in, the back of the follower here will tilt down. And I showed this in one of the other videos, so I'm not gonna load them up, but it'll tilt down quite a bit and it just stays there. So what happens is the bolt comes by to pick up the round and it just rides over the round, and pretty soon your receiver is turned into a discombobulated mess. Okay, so I'm going to take this other mag apart and I'll show you what I think is going on. Okay, so if you look at the D&H tactical follower, you can see that it, compared to the Magpul, I mean, look at all this. There's no way in hell this Magpul is going to tilt under pretty much any condition. You can also see where the spring is attached to the follower underneath here and how it leverages the pressure against the follower. Let me try to line these up. Now the difference in spring length, that just may be the box design on the Magpul. The spring needs to be a little bit longer. But look at the coil spacing between the D&H and the Magpul. You get quite a few less coils in addition to being shorter, which is also one of the issues, I think, is on this magazine, is there's not enough spring pressure. It's just not enough there, in my opinion. And then, like I said, there's no anti-tilt attributes to this follower. And it only does it when you have rounds loaded up. So I think that's the primary issue with the D&H Tactical. They need a better design follower, and they need more spring tension. And it's too bad because the quality of the box itself, other than the back of the feed lips being open instead of having a little reinforcement in the back, and even the Magpul has, even though it's plastic, you can see that they've got the back of the lips closed off. But I mean, the box itself is very well done. Everything's nice and even. There's no scratches, dents, dings. The box itself is put together very well. I think the primary issue is follower and spring. So anyway, I think that concludes our video. I know I was going to try to keep this video short, but they never seem to turn out that way. Pete, North Las Vegas, over and out.